Hi, everyone. This is Aaron with Silver Lion Student Loan Advisors. Um, Today, we're going to talk a little bit about student loan forgiveness. What is student loan forgiveness? Um, who qualifies for student loan forgiveness? Public service loan forgiveness as a function of student loan forgiveness as well. I'm going to share my screen so that you can all see the presentation that I pull up. So when I say student loan forgiveness, we'll also talk about the new account adjustment to the plans that student loan forgiveness dictates that you're in. We'll briefly talk about default. There was just recently an update about defaulted loans that came on yesterday. I'll speak about that as well. Um, Briefly about timelines and deadlines, and also give a quick update about the Biden Harris forgiveness program. We seem to get a lot of questions about that still as well. So, what is student loan forgiveness? When we say student loan forgiveness essentially is a deal between you as the borrower and the Department of Education. It says as long as you make X amount of payments, at the end of which everything else will be forgiven. For most borrowers, just your run of the mill, regular student loan forgiveness, you have to make 240 or 300 qualifying payments before you're eligible to have your loans forgiven. They have to be paid to direct loans. There are other loan types, Parent Plus loans, FIFO loans, Perkins loans. Those loans on their own won't qualify for a forgiveness program, but they can be made to qualify. That's your run of the mill student loan forgiveness. Every borrower with federal loans either qualifies or can be made to qualify for the forgiveness program. Now, when we speak about public service loan forgiveness says that anyone who either works for the government, it can be local government, city or county, state government, federal government, even tribal governments, our Native American neighbors, or people to work for, we say 501c3s or nonprofits. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 501c3. There are other 501cs that qualify. It's just a shorthand, if you will, as long as they're tax exempt and in a qualifying position. It has to be a position that's serves the public by the Department of Education or by the federal government's definition. If you're unsure whether your employer specifically qualifies for public service loan forgiveness, I would be more than happy to look them up and tell you. But it's a pretty safe bet to say a nonprofit, as long as it's a qualifying position, and any government entity will qualify. You have to work full time for the organization or what they consider to be full time. If you do not work full time, it has to be at least 30 hours. Now, this doesn't have to be 30 hours with just one employer. There are people that may work part time for a nonprofit, let's say 15 hours on average a week, and they may work for another one full time on average 15 hours a week. Together, that will add up to 30 hours on average, and that will be a qualifying employer. If you're seasonal or someone like an adjunct professor, they take the average based on the hours that you work. Adjunct professors, their time used to did not include office hours. It now includes office hours, and they can get away with slightly less than 30 hours as well. Again, you must have direct loans. If you're someone that has FIFO loans, the Federal Family Education Loan Program, this was the old student loan program that was done away with in 2010. If you're someone with Parent Plus loans or Perkins loans, on their own, these loans don't qualify, but they all can be made to qualify. It doesn't keep you from the program. You're just not eligible now, but your loans can be made to qualify. You have to repay those loans under an income driven repayment plan. Public service loan forgiveness and your run of the mill student loan forgiveness, they both dictate that payments are made under income driven repayment plans. They're the only plans that have the ability to offer student loan forgiveness. For public service loan forgiveness, you have to make 120 qualifying payments. A qualifying payment is a full on-time payment while in an income-driven repayment plan, while in a qualifying position. Um, if you make a payment a month, 120 payments equals out to 10 years, as opposed to your normal run-of-the-mill student loan forgiveness, which is 240 or 300 payments, depending on your loan type and the plan that you're in, or 20 or 25 years. So public service loan forgiveness will cut your repayment period by half or sometimes more than half. Now, public service loan forgiveness is by far the best option the Department of Education has for repayment. It isn't even close. But the program has never worked very well traditionally. 98% of people that actually qualify for it never get it. Part of the reason was our previous Secretary of Education in the previous administration. For whatever reason, she simply was not a fan of forgiveness programs and she refused to forgive loans under the student public service loan forgiveness, but also under discharges, which are available to people who are 100% or totally disabled, or to people that went to for profit colleges and they feel as though they were defrauded, or lawsuits have said they were actually defrauded. None of these laws, or excuse me, none of these loans were discharged or forgiven. She had to be sued and she lost every lawsuit. The law is very clear. Another reason or problem with public service loan forgiveness are the servicers. Anyone who's ever spoken with me or seen one of our webinars, they'll know I'm not a fan of the servicers. In my opinion, the servicers, and your servicers are your nail nets, your Navians, your Fed loans, your Great Lakes. They service your student loans on behalf of the Department of Education. They're paid with our tax dollars. The problem with the servicers, in my opinion, is that they more often than not do what's in their best interest. There's only one servicer that handles public service loan forgiveness. So when you're properly enrolled into the program, whomever your servicer was before, they no longer profit off your student loans. It used to be Fed Loan was the only servicer that handled public service loan forgiveness. They actually lost their federal contract due to bad practices. They were not properly enrolling people who should have qualified for public service loan forgiveness, excuse me, into the correct plans and programs, which leads us to our next point. Again, public service loan forgiveness dictates that your loans are paid under income driven repayment plans. Income driven repayment plans are only available to direct loans. Your loan program must be direct loans. What does this mean? This means if you have FEFL loans, FFEL, the Federal Family Education Loan Program, if you have Parent Plus loans, if you have Perkins loans, on their own, these loan programs do not qualify for public service loan forgiveness or your regular student loan forgiveness. They both, however, can be made to qualify, or all three, I should say. They can be converted into direct loans so that they can be enrolled into the correct plan, which is another reason most people that qualify for public service loan forgiveness never receive it. They may be making payments, those payments may be full on time payments, but they may be direct loans, but they're not in the correct repayment plan. Income driven repayment plans are the only plans that have the ability to offer student loan forgiveness. You must make 120 qualifying payments, which means to income driven repayment plans. If you're unsure about your student loan program or plan, you'll have an opportunity to either ask questions here today or schedule an appointment or call in, and we'll be more than happy to tell you what your loan type is. Another reason that people who qualify for public service loan forgiveness never receive it is employer qualification issues. Now, their employer may, in fact, be a qualifying employer. That may not even be disputed, but you actually have to enroll into public service loan forgiveness and have your employment certified. You may be making payments. You may be making payments to an income driven repayment plan. You may work for a qualifying employer. But if your employer has never been certified, then none of those payments are counting towards public service loan forgiveness. They can be made to qualify um, temporarily in some cases, but I'll speak more on that in a moment. Another reason is hours worked. You have to be work for a full-time qualifying employer or at least 30 hours. It does not have to be the same employer. As I mentioned earlier, those 30-hour minimum can be between more than one employer. You may work 20 hours for one, 10 hours for another. Together, that's at least 30 hours on average, which would qualify you for public service loan forgiveness. And finally, late and partial payments. Public service loan forgiveness dictates you make 120 full and on time payments as part of that qualifying payments. When we say partial payments, what the Department of Education means is if your monthly payments are $150, but you send in $149.95, this is a partial payment. It will not be counted towards your public service loan forgiveness. A late payment would be, for instance, if your payment date was the 12th of every month and you send your payment in after the 12th. Technically, however, they do give you a 15-day grace period. So the late, it would really be after the 27th if your repayment date was the 12th. But just to keep things simple, if you make your payment after your payment date, that's considered a late payment. While it does count or it will be counted towards you making your student loan payment, it won't count as a qualifying payment towards public service loan forgiveness. Now, as I mentioned, public service loan forgiveness dictates that you make your 120 payments under income driven repayment plans. But what about people who have never been in income driven repayment plans or just recently were in income driven repayment plans? This is one of the issues why public service loan forgiveness has never worked. For instance, we have a client who was a teacher for 20 years, was ready to retire, and thought that she had filled her obligation to public service loan forgiveness. It turned out she had never been in the correct plan or program. She had not made those 120 payments to an income driven repayment plan. She had never been in one, in fact. So, what the Department of Education has done is they said they'll do a one time plan adjustment. As long as your loans are made to qualify, when it first was announced by May 1st, you now have until the end of the year. As long as your loans are made to qualify by the end of the year, when they do the one time account adjustment, which they'll begin doing in the fall and continue to do after student loans go back into repayment, as long as they're made to qualify, they'll adjust the income driven repayment plan you've been placed in to reflect different periods of time. What are those periods of time? The first and the biggest that encompasses all of the others are time spent in repayment. When we say time spent in repayment, what do we mean? There are three major statuses of student loans. There's in school status. This is when you're actively taking classes. You're a student. There's your grace period that you go into once you stop going to school, whether you graduate or for whatever reason you stop taking classes. You're in your grace period for 6 months before you actually have to start making a payment. And that final status is in repayment. Now, there are subsections that we'll go over, but in repayment, you're no longer in school, you're outside of your grace period, your loans are in repayment. All this time that your loans are in repayment can now be made to count and converted into qualifying time as though you made a full and on time qualifying payment. This includes time in forbearance, 12 months consecutively, or 36 or more months cumulatively. They just announced yesterday that this time will go all the way back until July 1st of 1994. Any forbearances you've used since July 1st of 1994 can now be converted and into qualifying time and applied towards your public service loan forgiveness as well as your run-of-the-mill student loan forgiveness. This is a huge one. I've rarely ever reviewed loans where borrowers have not used the forbearance at some period of time. Economic hardship deferments, and I stress the economic hardship. In school deferments will not count, but economic hardship deferments from 2013 forward can now be counted, converted into qualifying time, and counted towards the repayment or counted as qualifying payments for both public service and your run of the mill student loan forgiveness. Time in repayment prior to consolidation. Once you consolidate loans, that's the Department of Education quite literally paying those loans off and opening you a new consolidated loan. These payments typically do not count once you consolidate your loans because you've never made a payment towards this consolidated loan. Now, every payment and every period of repayment prior to consolidation will now be counted towards your income driven repayment plan and converted to qualifying time. One that was just added yesterday that will help a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of borrowers, is it was always the time leading up to your loans being into default. Default is when you have not made a student loan payment for 270 consecutive days. Your loans will go into default. That time spent in default can never count towards a repayment plan or a forgiveness program. The Department of Education just announced yesterday that people that use their new program to get their loans out of default, all the time that you spent in default during the payment pause, which began in March of 2020, will also now be converted and added to your qualifying time for both public service loan forgiveness and your run of the mill student loan forgiveness. That's a big one as well. The big question everyone always has is, do my loans qualify for the account adjustment? Am I in the right plan or program? The simple answer is, if you have direct loans, if they're in an income driven repayment plan in good standing, then yes, you do. When we say good standing, we mean not only has that plan been recertified every year, income driven repayment plans technically are for 12 months at a time. They have to be recertified annually, but they're also not in default. What do we mean by default? I just touched on it a bit. Again, default is when you have not made a student loan payment for 270 consecutive days. Your loans will go into default and you'll lose what are called your federal privileges. Your federal privileges are your ability to get student loans through the federal government, federal student loans, and they'll also offset, and I'm doing air quotes around offset, your tax return if you receive one. They don't just offset it, they take the whole thing. Once your loans are in default, they're no longer with the Department of Education, they're with a collection company. They'll usually only apply between $5 and $50 to the interest of your student loans, and they'll keep the rest as a collection fee. And that isn't even the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is what happens next. There are two ways to get your loans out of default. The most common way is a rehabilitation program. A rehabilitation program is a 9-month program in which you would negotiate with the collection company to a reasonable monthly payment for those 9 months. Usually we'll try to negotiate between $5 and $50. But the thing is, the collection companies can still sell your debt up until the 5th month of your rehabilitation program. So what you will often see is while people ain't made these arrangements in good faith, because the collection company will sell their debt even while they're in a rehabilitation program, they then will go into garnishment, which is by far the worst case scenario when it comes to student loans. Garnishment is where you have a judgment against you so that the collection company is able to take 15% of every taxable income that you receive, whether it be employment income, unemployment income, some investment income, for the foreseeable future. Only a judge is able to release you from garnishment. It's extremely expensive and extremely difficult to get out of. We are able to get you out of garnishment, but garnishment is a situation that's best avoided altogether. The Department of Education's new program, however, where it used to take 9 months in the best of times, really a year or more, because the collection companies will sell that debt, you're now able to get your loans out of default in about a billing cycle or a month. And all that time spent in default, if you use the government's new program to get your loans out of default, can also be counted and converted into qualifying time and applied to your public service loan forgiveness, as well as your run of the mill student loan forgiveness. This is an amazing program to not only get people loans back in good standing, but to help borrowers get all the time that they should have had, um, which is usually, in my opinion, their servicer's fault. More often than not, when you see people using forbearances and deferments and their loans going into default, it's usually for economic reasons. And if those people had been in the correct plan and programs, it's likely they would have qualified for a $0 a month payment and never had the need to use a forbearance or economic hardship deferment, and most certainly would not have gone into default, needed a rehabilitation program, or gone into garnishment. These programs are excellent. They'll bring millions of borrowers either to the threshold or over it to have their loans forgiven by the Department of Education's count. They've already forgiven 500,000 student loans. If it turns out that your loans should have forgiven by now, but you are not in the correct plan or program, you are able, if it's done by the end of the year, to get that forgiveness presently. If it's done by August of 2023 and your loans qualify for forgiveness, that forgiveness will come this year as soon as both the Department of Education and the servicer that handles public service loan forgiveness, as long as they have it processed by then, it'll happen this year. If your loans are made to qualify by August. For people who, let's say, your loans will be forgivable or should be forgivable after August of 2023, it's likely your forgiveness letter will not come until student loans go back into repayment. But you will not have to make another student loan payment. If you qualify for forgiveness after August of 2023, but before student loans go back into repayment, again, your forgiveness letter, which means your loans have officially been forgiven, it may not come until after student loans go back into repayment this fall, but you will not have to make that payment. They'll still count your 120 qualifying payments. They just won't process the fact that your loans have been forgiven, and the Treasury won't send the check to pay them off until after student loans go back into repayment. This was just announced yesterday as well. So let's go over some of those program dates and deadlines. First, for the income driven repayment plan recalculation or the account adjustment, as long as your loans are made to qualify by the end of the year, they haven't said a specific date. Normally, when the federal government says by the end of the year, they literally mean 11:59 p.m. on December 31st. As long as your loans are made to qualify by the end of the year, you will be eligible to get any previous period of repayment that your loans were in for your student loan forgiveness program. If your public service loan forgiveness, any period in which you qualified for public service loan forgiveness. Periods of time before you work for a qualifying employer still won't count towards your public service loan forgiveness. Now, if it turns out you've already been paying student loans for 20 or 25 years, the account adjustment will forgive your loans presently, even if you qualify for public service loan forgiveness, but you have not yet been working for a qualifying employer for 10 years, which is why it's always good to have your loans reviewed by a professional. We'll tell you which program, if forgiveness is your option, is your goal, which program will forgive them faster. Um, but as long as your loans are made to qualify by the end of the year, you will receive the account adjustment after student loans go back into repayment or earlier, the earlier portion of next year. If your loans qualify for forgiveness now, before August of 2023, once your loans are made to qualify, that time will be applied and your loans will be forgiven this year by the Department of Education's announcement yesterday. If for whatever reason your forgiveness date is after August of 2023, then it's likely your forgiveness will come after student loans go back into repayment, but you will not have to make any additional payments. The deadline for the Department of Education's program that will get your loans out of default and back in good standing and allowing all that time to count as though you were making full and on time payments in the correct plan and program. That's also December 31st. It's the last day that that program will be available. So December 31st is now the big deadline where you want to make sure not only do your student loans qualify for forgiveness programs, be it public service loan forgiveness or regular run of the mill student loan forgiveness that everyone can qualify for. You want to make sure that's done as soon as possible. Although you have until the end of the year, we are still dealing with the federal government. They're good at a lot of things. Being efficient and effective, however, are not one of them. For instance, people that we process to take advantage of the public service loan forgiveness waiver that expired October 31st of 2022, those people are just now in March and April receiving their forgiveness letters. So it does take time. The government doesn't move as quickly as we would like. If you're unsure about whether you qualify or not, we'll be more than happy to let you know. Now, in August of 2022, President Biden announced the Biden Harris Forgiveness Program. This program would forgive $10,000 or $20,000 up front to borrowers with direct loans or government held FIFO loans. The difference between the 10 and 20,000 was whether or not that same borrower received a Pell Grant for their education. The forgiveness would have allowed any individual who made $125,000 or less in adjusted gross income, or anyone who files married filing jointly that together makes $250,000 or less in adjusted gross income, to have $10,000 forgiven unless they received the Pell Grant. Then at 20 would be, then at 10 would become $20,000 of forgiveness. This program has since been thrown out by two federal judges. It does not exist. Applications that were already submitted and some even approved will not be forgiven. You cannot submit an application. You cannot review an application that has already been submitted. The Supreme Court did hear oral arguments in February. They have not given their decision yet. This is why the last payment pause was extended for the Supreme Court to make their decision. Supposedly, student loans will go back into repayment 60 days after the court decides, which is kind of irresponsible not to give an exact date. So what the servicers have done, more specifically, the servicer that handles public service loan forgiveness, most people's repayment date is on or around September 30th. I know Nailnet, some of theirs is in October, but Nailnet is whole nother issue as well that we'll speak about on a different webinar. Now, what is it that we're able to do to help? Well, the very first thing we will want to know is what is your objective for your student loans? Some people prefer a faster repayment period. Some people prefer to pay less over the course of repayment, which is sometimes the same. Usually, when you pay, the more you pay, the faster your repayment period will be. Usually, this is not always the case if you qualify for a forgiveness program or are in a forgiveness program. And some people's goal is to have their student loans forgiven. Once we've identified what your goal is, we're going to want to review those loans. We will prefer to do so on the Department of Education's website, studentaid.gov, not your servicer, but the Department of Education's website. Again, studentaid.gov. Once we review your loans, we'll tell you what, if anything, stands out to us. We'll make a suggestion as to what you should do, and we'll run a projection based on that suggestion. We'll make comparison as to what you're paying now versus what you could be paying, what you would pay over the course of repayment, and how much, if any, student loan forgiveness the Department of Education expects you to have at the end of your repayment period, be it after 120 qualifying payments for public service loan forgiveness, or 240 or 300 payments for those without public service loan forgiveness. At that point, you'll have the ability to either take the information that we've given you freely and do with it what you will, or you can elect to have us do it for you. Obviously, just for us to review your loans, answer any questions that you have, and run a projection is at no cost, um, absolutely no cost. But to have us do it for you, for that we have a fee, depending on what it is we need to do. And one of our advisors, whomever you happen to speak with, will be very upfront about that fee. You'll also have the ability to use us on an ongoing basis. You'll have your own personal student loan advisor, someone who's familiar with you and your loans. You'll never need to be transferred around to three, four, five, six different people who give you three, four, five, six different answers. You'll have your own student loan advisors. Anyone who wants to call in, the number on the screen now, you'll be able to call in and speak with one of our advisors, or feel free to schedule an appointment right on my calendar. This is my Calendly appointment scheduler, and you'll be able to pick the day and time that works best for you and speak with me about your student loans. I'll answer any questions that you have, and we'll review your loans and go over the plans and programs that you qualify for. I'm going to open the floor up to any questions. I don't see any questions that's been presented in the chat box. If you don't have any questions or comments, if you do, either raise your hand or put them in the chat box. If not, feel free to either call in or schedule an appointment to speak with one of our advisors. We'll be more than happy to answer any questions, go through your student loans, the entire history of your student loans, and let you know what it is that you may or may not qualify for. Again, my name is Aaron with Silver Lion Student Loan Advisors, and I thank everyone for their time. And I hope to speak to you all soon.